I'm Mr. Jackson, Chief Meteorologist David Heckard. This is a big week in the weather community. This week is Hurricane Preparedness Week. We are now in the early part of May, and now is the time to begin thinking about what you would do in the event a major hurricane were to approach southeast Georgia and northeast Florida. Of course, last year was a very intense year where we dealt with Ian and Nicole. Hopefully we won't be dealing with anything like that this year. But one of the topics today is on evacuation routes. And of course, this is something we see a lot of here in Florida and in Georgia. You've seen this line. In fact, you saw a lot of this during Ian and Nicole, a lot of streaming of cars and people evacuating, leaving an area that is threatened by a hurricane or tropical storm. But there's some myths out there about an evacuation route. And one of the bigger ones is the fact that you have to really get far, far, far away. That's simply not the case. In fact, now the National Hurricane Center, even emergency management officials, they recommend people evacuating inland areas dozens of miles, not necessarily hundreds of miles, all the way up towards Charlotte or the Atlanta region. And the reason for that is twofold. One is the fact that we don't need to clog the roadways with traffic that doesn't necessarily need to be evacuating. In a lot of cases, inland communities will be fine even during a major hurricane as long as you're in a sturdy structure. And secondly, it slows down kind of the recovery process. If you are stationed in the Charlotte area, it's going to take you another day to get back down to begin the recovery efforts in your area once they allow people back into these evacuation zones. So moving into more inland areas is going to be a little bit better for the whole process for everyone. And again, it really reduces clogging up the roadways. Other things you need to keep in mind on as well is the fact that hurricanes can strengthen very, very quickly. And Exhibit A of this was what happened down here with Ian in southwest Florida. Remember, we knew this was going to be a pretty significant hurricane, but nobody really thought this was going to be a high-end Category 4, Category 5 hurricane at landfall. And you don't have to close your eyes hard to think of past events where we end up with a low Category 1 hurricane and they become Category 2 or Category 3 hurricanes that will quickly work their way across parts of Florida and even sections of Georgia. So the bottom line here is you got to keep very close attention to forecasts if you live in a hurricane-prone location and you think you're going to possibly need to be evacuated. The other big thing, and we know a lot about this, is the inland flooding threat and the storm surge threat. Keep in mind that storm surge arrives normally well ahead of an actual system. And that's very, very important because sometimes the surge can arrive even before the real inclement weather begins. And of course, we have had issues with the St. Johns River well before even the beginnings of a major system. And oftentimes that kind of surprises people in evacuation zones. So keep that in mind that sometimes areas can get flooded very, very quickly, and they could be sometimes hours, even maybe even a day ahead of the actual system. And then another big point is having two routes available for evacuation of an area. That's very important because your primary evacuation route, especially if you live on a barrier island, that could potentially not be available depending on flooding. And secondly, gives you a second round in the event significant traffic jams begins to develop along some of the major thoroughfares like I-95, I-10. So having two ways out really improves your success rate. And probably the most important thing is when an evacuation is ordered for your area, heed the evacuation warnings. There's a reason the evacuation order has been issued, and that's because emergency management believes a life-threatening situation could occur in your area. So even if you don't think it's going to happen, play it safe, do it for the best, not just for you, but the emergency managers as well, and the first responders. Evacuate to a safer location in the event evacuation is ordered in your area. So bottom line, we're hopefully not going to be having evacuation orders here in 2023, but now is the time to start thinking about what you would do in the event of an evacuation. I'm Assistant Chief Meteorologist David Heckard for Channel 4, the local station.